Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a stack of critical sources, articles, research, and expert notes and synthesize them into pure, actual knowledge.
We give you that shortcut to being thoroughly informed.
And today we are undertaking a deep dive into a globally critical region, a place defined by geological extremes, immense wealth, and, well, some really existential resource challenges.
We're talking about the Arabian Peninsula.
Our mission today is complex. We really need to move beyond the usual headlines about oil and conflict.
Right.
We want to establish a foundational understanding of its geography, its deep, often surprising history, and the environmental reality, specifically the crisis that's shaping this massive landmass.
And our sources today are pretty extensive. They cover everything from the plate tectonics that created the land to, the satellite data that's revealing its future water woes.
And I absolutely need that context because the sheer scale here it's just immense.
It is. When we talk about the Arabian Peninsula, we are talking about the largest peninsula in the world.
Largest in the world. Okay, that's a staggering claim that immediately requires some kind of frame of reference. When we say immense, how big are we really talking?
We're talking about a landmass spanning 3,237,500 square kilometers. That's about 1.25 million square miles.
Which is still just a number to most people.
Exactly. So for a frame of reference that really helps you internalize the scale, the Arabian Peninsula is comparable in size to the entire subcontinent of India.
To India, wow.
It sits just northeast of Africa, riding on top of its own tectonic structure, the Arabian Plate.
Comparing it to India instantly redefines the magnitude. It's not just a collection of small Gulf states. It's this colossal landform, a geopolitical juggernaut.
It is.
And from a modern perspective, we know this landmass is critical because of one primary resource, right? It's vast reserves of oil and natural gas. But how much of that massive area is historically uninhabitable? And how does that ratio affect, modern governance and resource planning?
That ratio is everything. And it's why understanding the geography first is so crucial. Let's start by charting its existence, beginning with the very ground it sits on and defining its borders, both physical and political.
Okay, let's start with the geology. That massive scale suggests a pretty violent, world-changing origin.
Geologically, its origin story is tied to a massive, ongoing continental rift. The peninsula was formed as a result of the rifting of the Red Sea.
Rifting, so pulling apart.
Pulling apart. An event that happened roughly between 56 and 23 million years ago. Essentially, the Arabian Plate started to pull away from the African Plate.
And that's still happening.
It's an ongoing tectonic separation. It's what created the deep basin of the Red Sea and thrust up those massive mountain ranges along its western edge. You can think of it as a giant geological mechanism that's slowly peeling this huge landmass away from the rest of Africa.
And that plate movement defines the physical boundaries we recognize today.
Yeah.
So if we were to take a journey, say, from the west and move clockwise around the entire landmass, what are the waters that define its edges?
Okay, so to the west and southwest, the major barrier is the Red Sea, which eventually funnels down into this narrow, critical choke point.
The Bab-el-Mandeb Strait.
The Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, exactly. Then, moving around the southern tip, we encounter the Gulf of Aden, then the Guardafui Channel, the vast Arabian Sea, and finally, the Greater Indian Ocean.
That is a truly enormous coastline facing the Indo-Pacific. It gives it a massive maritime footprint.
A huge one. And as we continue that clockwise sweep toward the northeast, the coastline is then defined by the Gulf of Oman, leading into the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz, and then into the Persian Gulf.
But when you reach the northern edge, things get a bit fuzzy, right? The delineation becomes much less precise.
Yeah, the peninsula essentially just merges inland with the Syrian desert. There's no clear, natural borderline.
So no neat, obvious line across the sand. What factors define where Arabia ends and, say, the Levant or Mesopotamia begins?
No, not a clean physical barrier like a river or a mountain range. But geopolitically and culturally, the boundary is generally considered to be the northern borders of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait.
Okay.
But it's important to acknowledge that the broader geographic and cultural definition, what scholars call Arabia, often includes the southern regions of Iraq and, significantly, Jordan.
Why Jordan?
Well, because of shared tribal histories, ancient trade routes, and just the continuity of the desert landscape itself.
Let's get granular on the modern political map. We need to know the core countries that make up this landmass today, starting with the dominant presence.
Right. The core list starts with Saudi Arabia, which, as you said, covers the greater part of the landmass. Then you have Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, Oman, and Yemen.
And Bahrain.
And we also have to include the island country of Bahrain, which lies just off the east coast. While it's not physically connected, it is historically and geopolitically part of the broader region of Arabia.
And beyond just the list of names, how do these nations politically coalesce? Is an alliance like the GCC a consistent thing, or is it more aspirational?
The GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, is a pretty significant attempt at political and economic cohesion. It's the alliance formed by 6 of those countries: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE.
And while it's often challenged by internal disputes,
It functions as the primary security and economic bloc for the oil-rich monarchies. But it excludes Yemen, which immediately underscores this political-economic divide that we'll definitely get into later.
and one geographic specific our sources highlight, a kind of nested geography.
Right, that's Qatar. Qatar is noted as the only peninsular country in the Persian Gulf that sits on the larger Arabian Peninsula.
So it's a peninsula on a peninsula.
It is, quite literally. An interesting geographical distinction that, really influences its diplomatic positioning and its coastal exposure.
Stepping back from the modern map, that brings us logically to how the classical world saw this territory. Let's pivot now to the ancient identities.
Yep.
The difference between the Roman divisions of the peninsula. It tells a much richer story than just a uniform desert.
It absolutely does. The Roman and Hellenistic geographers used 3 powerful, highly descriptive names, and these names immediately highlight the intense differences in environment, wealth, and civilization across the region centuries ago.
Let's start with a hard-to-miss central designation that captured the vastness of the interior.
That would be Arabia Deserta, meaning Desert Arabia. This title signified the massive, relatively unpopulated, and largely unadministered desert interior.
The lands that were just too harsh to control.
Exactly. And this designation stuck for a very long time. Think of the famous travelogue by Charles M. Doughty, published in 1888. It's titled Travels in Arabia Deserta. The name itself just evokes this landscape of hardship and isolation.
Doughty's account is incredible, just traversing that terrain with only tribal support, years before air conditioning or decent roads. That book title alone reinforces the enduring reality of that environment. What about the northwest borderlands?
That area was designated Arabia Petraea, or Stony Arabia. This region encompassed the southern Levant, the Sinai Peninsula, and the northwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula.
And its identity was shaped by
Entirely by the powerful Nabatean kingdom, whose capital, Petra in modern-day Jordan, was a crucial hub for the frankincense and spice trade.
And this is a vital distinction.
A vital one. Arabia Petraea was the only one of the 3 divisions that the Romans deemed worthy or manageable enough to turn into a formal Roman province.
So Petraea was defined by trade and strategy. Deserta was defined by emptiness. And then we have the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the name that suggests a land of plenty.
That is Arabia Felix, meaning fortunate Arabia.
Fortunate.
This name was reserved for the southern part of the peninsula, corresponding mostly to modern Yemen and parts of Oman. It was deemed fortunate because it lay outside the rain shadow of the western mountains and received significant monsoon rainfall.
Which resulted in a totally different landscape.
A completely different landscape. Greener, far more productive fields, and a sophisticated settled agriculture based on irrigation.
It's a powerful historical reflection on water scarcity. The ancients already recognized this profound north-south divide based purely on access to moisture and what you could grow.
Precisely. And this dichotomy was so ingrained that Arabians themselves used a similar structural division for millennia. Ash-Sham for the Levant or the north, versus Al-Yaman for Yemen or the south.
And that correlates almost exactly to the Roman divisions.
It does. Arabia Deserta versus Arabia Felix. It shows that long before anyone discovered oil, the distribution of water dictated prosperity, population density, and political organization.
How did these classical names evolve when later larger empires sought to govern the region?
Well, the Ottomans, who exerted some nominal control over the coastlines, used a very broad administrative term, Arabistan.
And that was a huge area.
It was expansive. It stretched from Cilicia in modern Turkey down through Palestine, across the Sinai, and included the Arabian coastal regions. It was a general geographic description for the lands inhabited by Arabs, far exceeding the actual control the Ottoman bureaucracy exercised over the interior.
And finally, what do modern geographers prefer?
Modern Arab geographers universally refer to the whole landmass as Jazirat al-Arab,
Which means
it translates directly and powerfully as the Peninsula of the Arabs. This terminology really solidifies the region's cultural and linguistic position as the original home of the Arab peoples.
Moving from those fascinating historical identities to the physical ground itself, the diversity of the landscape is often lost in that simple label, desert. Let's talk about the incredible geological variation.
The systematic variation in exposed rocks across Arabia is, well, it's a geologist's dream. The oldest exposed rocks are situated near the Red Sea coast, forming what is known as the Arabian-Nubian Shield.
These are ancient crystalline rocks.
Very ancient. Then, as you move inland, east toward the Persian Gulf, these older formations are progressively overlain by younger, thick layers of sedimentary rock.
It's like a geological layer cake where the slicing happens toward the coast. Speaking of slicing, our sources highlight the geological marvel in the east that speaks volumes about the violent formation of the peninsula.
The sea-male ophiolite. Found in the mountains of the UAE and northern Oman, it's one of the most stunning features. An ophiolite is essentially a preserved, intact slice of the Earth's oceanic crust and the underlying upper mantle that has been thrust up and exposed onto continental crust.
Wait, so this is ocean floor rock sitting high up in the mountains? What does that even imply about continental movement?
It implies an unimaginable collision. The sea-male ophiolite is described as perhaps the best preserved example of this phenomenon on Earth. It's evidence of the Arabian plate colliding with the Iranian plate millions of years ago, a process called abduction, where the denser ocean floor material was literally scraped up and piled high onto the continental edge.
So for geologists, this exposure it's a critical open-air laboratory.
It is. It allows them to study the deep-sea floor and mantle layers without having to drill miles deep.
Let's break down the internal landscape. Our sources identify 5 main types of land, which paint a picture far richer than just one endless sand dune.
Okay, so in the geographical heart, you have the central plateau, the Najd. This is an elevated, relatively flat interior that features fertile valleys and pastures necessary for grazing livestock, historically sheep and camels.
And the Najd has always been the political and economic core of the interior, right? The domain of the El Saud.
That's right. And surrounding the Najd are the defining desert regions.
2 immense desert systems.
2. In the north, you have the Nefud, which is described as stony or gravelly with vast red sand dunes. Contrast that with the south. The notorious Rub al-Khali, the Great Arabian Desert, the Empty Quarter.
The Empty Quarter.
This is the largest continuous sand desert in the world.
I remember the measurement from the sources on this. It's not just wide, it's unimaginably deep.
That's right. This immense sea of sand is so vast and deep that the sand is estimated to extend 600 feet, or 180 meters, below the surface in some areas.
600 feet. For context, that's taller than the Washington Monument.
Right. Imagine a desert consisting of sand piled higher than that monument, stretching for thousands of miles. This environment made it virtually impenetrable until modern vehicles. It was a massive natural barrier to movement and governance.
And these 2 great deserts aren't contiguous. They're separated by a geographical spine.
They're separated by the Dana Mountains, which act as a dividing ridge and, a natural route for tribal movements and trade.
What about the immediate edge along the major waterways?
Along the Red Sea side, you find the Tihama, a strip of dry or marshy coastal plain. This is where we find those crucial coastal coral reefs.
And in the east?
In eastern Arabia, facing the Gulf, you find the important oases and marshy coastlands like the Al Ain Tawam region and Hufuf al-Asa, which benefit from groundwater surfacing closer to the sea.
And finally, that southern edge, the historical Arabia Felix.
That is the southwest monsoon coastline, encompassing the regions of Dhofar in Oman and eastern Yemen. And this area is defined by completely unique climatic and ecological factors that fundamentally oppose that arid stereotype of the north.
Let's talk about the vertical landscape, the mountains. Where are the true heights in a land defined by plateaus and plains?
Mountains exist prominently on the eastern, southern, and northwestern borders, and they are functional features. In the west, bordering the Red Sea, you have the immense Sarawat Range.
This includes the famous subranges like the Haraz, Asir, and Hijaz Mountains.
It does, and these ranges create a rain shadow, capturing any moisture coming from the Red Sea and basically defining the aridity of the interior.
And elsewhere.
To the northeast, we find the Hajar Range, running through the UAE and Oman, which contains that sea-male ophiolite we talked about. The southeast has the Dhofar Mountains, and centrally, the Tuwaik Escarpment is a significant, high cliffline within the Najd that defined historical defensibility.
Is there a noticeable gradient in altitude across these ranges?
A very clear one. From the Hijaz southwards, the mountains steadily increase in altitude, reaching their highest points as they approach Yemen.
So this is critical.
It's a critical geographical fact. The highest peaks on the entire peninsula are all located in Yemen.
So the most important peaks are in the region historically called Fortunate. What is the undisputed high point?
The highest confirmed peak on the Arabian Peninsula is Jabal Anabi Shuaib, also known as Jabal Hathor. It's part of the Haraz Range and stands at an imposing 3,666 meters, or 12,028 feet high.
Wow, that's substantially higher than peaks like Mount Fuji or Mount Olympus.
It is. And these altitudes create unique microclimates that are completely unexpected for this region.
That brings us directly to the paradox of water. This is the existential challenge for the peninsula. We know surface water is essentially non-existent.
Right. It's defined only by seasonal watercourses.
Wadis.
Correct. Arabia has virtually no permanent rivers or lakes. Most drainage is handled by these ephemeral watercourses called wadis. These are dry riverbeds that fill rapidly and often violently, only during the rare, intense rainy season.
So if the surface is dry, where does the life-giving water that supports millions come from?
It comes from below the surface, thanks to plentiful ancient aquifers. Where this water naturally surfaces, we find oases and sophisticated settled agriculture thrives.
And Al-Hassa and Qatif are the prime examples.
They are. Located in eastern Arabia, they are two of the world's largest oases, sustained entirely by this deep groundwater.
And this hidden resource sustains a massive commercial crop that the region dominates globally.
That would be the palm tree. Due to these thriving oases, the Arabian Peninsula produces more dates than any other region in the world. It's an ancient agricultural heritage, but it's reliant on a hidden, finite water source.
Let's delve into those unique microclimates again, particularly in the deep south. How does the climate shift from the extremely arid Najd to something resembling the tropics?
While the vast majority of the peninsula is extremely hot and arid, the exceptions are spectacular. The higher elevations are naturally temperate due to altitude, which allows for different crops.
Right.
But the most dramatic shift is along the Arabian Sea coastline in Dhofar, Oman, and Al Mara in Yemen. This area receives cool, humid summer breezes.
What generates that humidity in the middle of a desert climate?
It's due to the cold upwelling of deep ocean water offshore in the Arabian Sea, caused by seasonal winds, the Kharif, or monsoon.
And this results in a humid, tropical monsoon climate.
It does. This environment is so distinct that it sustains large-scale coconut plantations, something you would never expect to find thousands of miles from the Indian tropics.
And how does this environmental advantage define Yemen specifically, the historical Arabia Felix?
Yemen is environmentally distinct from its northern neighbors. It boasts a tropical monsoon, rain-influenced mountain climate, and historically fertile soils. This encouraged dense, stable settlement for millennia, from sea level up to 10,000 feet.
And the population has developed elaborate terraces.
Complex, elaborate terraces in these high elevations to facilitate the cultivation of essential crops like grain, fruit, coffee, ginger, and, controversially today, khat. It is fundamentally a self-sustaining agricultural society. Or at least it was until very recently.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we talk endlessly about oil wealth, but let's talk about their true crisis, water scarcity. The ancient aquifers sustaining all this life are under unbelievable pressure.
The situation is not just serious, it's existential. We have direct, unequivocal data from NASA's GRACE satellite mission.
The Gravity, Recovery, and Climate Experiment.
Exactly. GRACE uses 2 satellites to precisely measure changes in the Earth's gravitational field, which lets scientists map water movement, specifically groundwater depletion from space.
What did the GRACE data, analyzed between 2003 and 2013, reveal about this system?
If findings were terrifyingly stark, the Arabian Aquifer System, which is this complex network of deep sedimentary basins that over 60 million people depend on.
60 million people.
It is the most overstressed aquifer system in the world. This is based on rates of loss versus rates of recharge.
The most overstressed globally. That is a truly destabilizing statistic. What does overstressed mean in practical terms for the region?
It means they have massively exceeded a critical sustainability tipping point. When we talk about overstress, we mean that extraction rates are just significantly outpacing natural recharge rates.
And the primary driver is agriculture.
It is. The expansion of water-intensive crops in historically arid zones, funded by oil revenues. When this water runs out, those regions can't just revert to subsistence farming. They face population collapse or complete unsustainable reliance on desalination.
And this is not an isolated phenomenon, but the Arabian system leads the list.
That's right. The Gray study found that 21 of the 37 largest global aquifers have exceeded sustainability tipping points and are being depleted. 13 of them are classified as significantly distressed. The Arabian system is at the absolute top of that list.
So this is the resource disparity that, in the long term, will utterly redefine the stability of the Gulf far more profoundly than fluctuating oil prices.
It dictates future policy, foreign aid, regional alliances. The oil money buys the power, but water dictates who survives.
Let's look briefly at the marine environment. We noted that the sea surrounding the peninsula is generally tropical, but there's a huge divergence between the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf when it comes to coral reefs.
This is a remarkable story of environmental adaptation. The Red Sea corals have a unique genetic hot weather adaptation.
Meaning?
The ancestors of these corals survived a period of intense heat exposure in the past, making them inherently more resilient to sudden temperature changes. As a result, the Red Sea corals are largely not affected by the mass coral bleaching that is currently devastating Indo-Pacific reefs.
That is an incredible built-in resilience. Are they also generally safe from other human pressures?
Yes. Our sources note that they are relatively pristine. They're mostly unaffected by mass tourism, large-scale industrialization, or commercial deep-sea fishing. This makes the Red Sea one of the world's most important and largest reservoirs of climate-resistant coral.
Now contrast that ecological success story with the Persian Gulf.
The Persian Gulf tells a very different and tragic story. It has suffered extensive loss and degradation of coral reefs. The biggest ongoing threat there is relentless coastal construction activity. Massive dredging, land reclamation projects, port expansion.
All of which drastically alters water salinity, clarity, and sediment loads.
Exactly. And that, coupled with oil spill risks and chronic pollution, makes their situation far more precarious than their Red Sea counterparts.
Given the historical image of the peninsula as deserta, arid, and unsuited for large populations, the modern demographics are just astonishing. Let's discuss the unprecedented rapid population change.
Despite the historically sparse population, political Arabia has experienced population growth rates unseen almost anywhere else in the world.
And this is fueled by two interacting forces.
Primarily, a massive, sustained inflow of migrant labor, particularly into the GCC states, and persistently high birth rates among the native populations who have benefited from the newfound wealth.
This inflow of migrant labor has radically reshaped the entire demographic structure, particularly in the Gulf monarchies.
It has created an extreme demographic skew. The population is young, and the adult-sex ratio is heavily skewed toward males. The reason is structural. Migrant labor is overwhelmingly male.
To what extent?
In some eastern regions, the demographic distortion is so severe that females constitute only a quarter of people aged between 20 and 40. And furthermore, in several key states, the expatriate population now substantially outnumbers the native citizenry.
And this growth manifests most violently in the smallest, richest states.
That's where you find the world's most extreme urbanization rates. The four smallest GCC states, the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait, showcase world-leading population growth, nearly tripling every 2 decades.
Tripling every 2 decades. That is explosive, sustained expansion that requires constant infrastructure, massive energy for desalination, and imported labor just to maintain.
It does.
The major population centers reflect this. Riyadh is now a mega-city that has grown almost overnight.
Riyadh is the most populous city on the peninsula, clocking in at over 7 million residents. Following that, you have Jeddah, and then the rapidly growing Dubai, estimated at 3.4 million.
And Osana.
It's important to note Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, also maintains a large population, estimated at 3.4 million. This highlights that despite conflict and poverty, the traditional high-density population centers in the south remain highly significant, though they are currently under extreme stress.
Let's pivot now to the deepest history, returning to a time when this landmass was not defined by its modern aridity. What's fascinating here is the Arabian Peninsula wasn't always the desolate barrier we know today.
Not at all. It was a critical migration corridor for early humanity.
Green Arabia.
The idea of a Green Arabia is supported by increasingly robust archaeological evidence. Stone tools and animal fossils found at Tiz al-Ghada in northwestern Saudi Arabia suggest that hominins migrated through a much wetter, lusher green Arabia between 300,000 and 500,000 years ago.
500,000 years ago, this was a pathway, not a barrier.
Exactly. And there's further evidence from Acheulean tool stone hand axes found near Riyadh, dating hominids to 188,000 years ago. This shows a sustained presence during these wet phases. The shifting sands were interspersed with lakes and rivers, making inland routes viable.
So when did Homo sapiens definitively use this route in the out-of-Africa migration?
This is a crucial finding that really rewrote timelines. A fossilized Homo sapiens finger bone was discovered at Al-Wusta in the Nifud Desert,
And it takes two.
approximately 90,000 years ago. This represents the oldest human fossil discovered outside of Africa and the Levant. It proves that early Homo sapiens migration into Arabia happened much earlier and more directly than previous theories suggested, utilizing this brief green corridor.
That means Arabia was a direct corridor, not a slow secondary route. And this early isolation seems to have left a genetic legacy.
The basal Eurasian theory.
Right.
This theory suggests that the peninsula may have been the geographical homeland of a distinct population known as basal Eurasians. They diverged genetically soon after the initial out-of-Africa migration, becoming an isolated genetic reservoir during the subsequent arid periods when the land dried up again.
What does that isolation imply for later history?
It implies that this population remained isolated for millennia, protected by the Hoskel Desert. They later mixed with other Middle Eastern populations around 25,000 years ago. And the crucial connection is that our sources suggest the spread of this basal Eurasian ancestry throughout Western Eurasia later on was linked directly to the spread of agriculture, the Neolithic Revolution.
So this isolated desert was not just a migration route. It was a crucial, stable genetic reservoir that helped seed later human expansion across the Middle East and Europe.
A pretty fundamental role.
Moving forward many millennia, let's explore the powerful, settled civilizations that thrived in the millennia leading up to the 7th century. Let's unpack this. The peninsula was a hub of powerful, organized kingdoms long before the rise of Islam.
That's right. Archaeological evidence confirms extensive organization, especially in the south, in Arabia Felix. This region was home to highly developed South Arabian civilizations, famous for their control of trade routes and irrigation systems.
Like the kingdoms of Saba, Asan, Main, and Himyar.
Exactly. Saba, for example, built the massive Marib Dam, one of the great engineering feats of the ancient world, which enabled vast agriculture.
So settled, agricultural, and wealthy kingdoms in the south. And what about the coastal trading power in the east?
Eastern Arabia was the location of the Dilmun civilization, focused around the Persian Gulf trade routes. It functioned as a key intermediary between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley.
And meanwhile, in the northwest,
The northwestern area, Arabia Petraea, was formally annexed by the Roman Empire in 106 AD and controlled until 630 AD, ensuring Roman access to those lucrative northern trade routes.
beyond political control, this region carries a foundational significance for language itself.
Absolutely foundational. The Arabian Peninsula has long been accepted by most scholars as the original Ur-Heimat, the primordial homeland of the Semitic languages.
So the vast majority of early Semitic languages originated or flourished here.
Correct. It makes this region linguistically central to the entire Middle East.
This extensive pre-Islamic history sets the stage for the most transformative event in the peninsula's history, the birth and expansion of the Islamic world.
The 7th century witnessed the rise of the landmass's dominant religion. The Prophet Muhammad was born in Mecca around 570 AD and began preaching in 610, culminating in his migration, the Hijra, to Medina in 622.
And this process was swift and revolutionary.
It was. He and his companions managed to unite the famously disparate and often warring tribes of Arabia into the first unified Islamic state, a single Arab-Muslim religious polity.
And the immediate aftermath of his death in 632 was defined by the first major challenge to that political structure.
The challenge was immediate and internal. Upon Muhammad's death, disagreement arose over succession. Abu Bakr was nominated and became the first caliph, but his first task wasn't external conquest.
Was putting down a massive internal rebellion.
Exactly, a rebellion by Arab tribes who questioned the political continuity. These were the fierce Ridda Wars, or Wars of Apostasy. Once consolidated, the unified power of the Rashidun Caliphate was unleashed outward.
And the scale of the expansion under the early caliphs was stunningly rapid.
It was unparalleled. Under the Rashidun caliphs and the subsequent Umayyad caliphates, Arab power just exploded well beyond the peninsula. Muslim armies decisively defeated the Byzantine army and completely destroyed the massive Persian Empire.
Conquering territories from the Iberian Peninsula all the way to India.
All in the space of about a century.
That massive, rapid conquest immediately introduced a separation that would define Arabia's status for the next 1,000 years. And this raises an important question. Why did the center of political gravity shift so quickly away from the birthplace of the faith?
The reasons were practical and strategic. The political focus of the rapidly growing Muslim world quickly shifted to newly conquered, geographically strategic cities.
Places with better infrastructure, better access to wealth.
And they were closer to the major population centers they were now, governing cities like Damascus, Baghdad, and Cairo. These were just better suited for administration and control of the vast new empire than the arid, relatively isolated cities of the Hejaz.
So the political power moved outward, but the spiritual core remained firmly within the peninsula.
Absolutely. Mecca and Medina remained the spiritual, indispensable heartland. Mecca houses the Kaaba, Islam's holiest site, and the Hajj pilgrimage is required of all able-bodied Muslims.
And Medina holds the Prophet Muhammad's grave.
Right. These two cities became and remain the mandatory pilgrimage destinations, ensuring that Arabia was always revered, even if it was politically peripheral.
So even as empires like the Abbasids and Fatimids rose and fell far afield, who was maintaining political order and guarding the Hajj routes in the spiritual heartland?
That responsibility fell to the local rulers known as the Hashemite Sharifs of Mecca. Starting from the 10th century and continuing right up until the 20th century, the Sharifs maintained a stable, semi-independent state in the most developed part of the region, the Hejaz.
How much independence did they actually wield?
While they exercised substantial independent authority locally managing the cities and the Hajj routes, they were always careful to pay homage to and submit to the suzerainty of the dominant major Islamic empire of the time.
A system of vassalage.
Exactly. It was the key to their long-term survival. This included the Abbasids, the Fatimids, the Ayyubids, and later the Mamluks of Egypt. Their role was essential, maintaining order for millions of pilgrims without challenging the supreme political authority in Damascus or Cairo.
As we transition into the modern era, the dynamics start to shift dramatically. This brings us to the actual presence of the Ottoman Empire in Arabia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
And it's vital to correct the misconception that the Ottomans controlled the entire landmass. Their provincial army for Arabia, the Arabistan or Dusu, was strategically headquartered in Syria.
And it governed places like Palestine, Transjordan, Iraq, and the Hejaz.
Right. But crucially, the Ottoman Empire never established any lasting administrative or military control over Central Arabia, specifically the vast, arid Najd region.
That central absence, the lack of an imperial footprint in the Najd, allowed a local power to emerge and define the future of the peninsula. The Al Saud dynasty.
Exactly.
The rise of the Al Saud began in that uncontrolled central region, the Najd, in 1744. This date marks the alliance between Muhammad bin Saud, the local emir, and Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, the religious leader who founded the strict puritanical Wahhabi movement of Sunni Islam.
And this combination of political ambition and religious fervor was instantly transformative. It was. The resulting emirate of Diriyah expanded rapidly. The sources note that this first Saudi state briefly controlled most of present-day Saudi Arabia. They demonstrated their aggressive power by sacking the holy Shiite city of Karbala in 1802 and capturing Mecca itself in 1803.
Which severely challenged Ottoman allied power.
It did. This early state was eventually crushed by a retaliatory force sent by the Ottoman-affiliated ruler of Egypt in 1818, but the blueprint for Saudi expansion was set.
Moving to the early 20th century, what major infrastructural projects solidified the Ottoman presence right before their eventual collapse?
That was the Hejaz Railway. Construction started in 1900 under Ottoman Sultan Abdulhamid II. The intent was deeply religious. It was built as a Wafir religious endowment to facilitate the Hajj pilgrimage, linking Damascus to Medina.
Largely built by Turks with German support.
And it served to solidify the Ottoman claim over the Hejaz.
Simultaneously, regional aspirations for an independent Arab nation were becoming clear, demonstrated by the Damascus Protocol of 1914.
The protocol was a critical moment. It outlined a proposal, secretly requested by Arab leaders, for a single, unified Arab state guaranteed by Britain.
That would span from Cilicia in the north down to Aden in the south.
A massive state. It would encompass Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and most of the Arabian Peninsula.
This desire for unification and independence led directly to the Arab Revolt.
The Arab Revolt, 1916-1918, was initiated by the Hashemite Sharif Hussein ibn Ali of Mecca against the Ottomans during WWI. It was explicitly aimed at achieving that unified, independent Arab state envisioned in the Damascus Protocol.
Allied with Britain.
Allied with Britain. He led tribal forces that successfully disrupted the Hejaz Railway and pushed the Ottomans out of the region.
But the outcome wasn't a unified state led by the Hashemites. It was the ultimate defeat of the Hashemites by the Al Saud.
The Hashemites were ultimately defeated by the third and permanent iteration of the Al Saud dynasty. Abdulaziz ibn Saud established the Third Saudi state. After regrouping and capturing Riyadh in 1902, he successively annexed the critical regions of Al-Hassa, Jabal Shamar, and eventually the Sacred Hejaz itself between 1913 and 1926.
And the kingdom concluded its major territorial expansion in 1934 after a border war with Yemen.
The consolidation was complete. And then came the singular, earth-shattering development of the 20th century that transformed this landscape overnight.
The discovery of vast reserves of oil and natural gas in the 1930s.
This production brought unprecedented, immense wealth to all of the northern countries in the region: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain. It dramatically transformed their economies from subsistence desert states to global energy players.
But again, this massive, sudden wealth missed one incredibly important country.
Yes. The wealth transformed Arabia Deserta. It did not transform Yemen, the historical Arabia Felix, which lacked significant oil reserves and retained its agricultural, high-density, high-altitude structure.
And this fundamental, persistent disparity remains the core source of regional instability and tension to this day.
It really does.
We have three major regional conflicts that our sources highlight, each showing different layers of geopolitical involvement. Let's start with the highly instructive North Yemen Civil War from 1962 to 1970.
This conflict was essentially a massive proxy war. It was fought between royalists who were supported by the newly oil-rich monarchy of Saudi Arabia and Republicans who were heavily supported by Egypt's charismatic president Gamal Abdel Nasser and, to a lesser extent, the Soviet Union.
This involved massive external intervention, particularly from Egypt. What was the scale of Nasser's commitment?
It was devastatingly large. Nasser deployed up to 70,000 Egyptian troops to support the Republicans in the rugged Yemeni mountains.
Right.
This was a direct ideological confrontation between Nasser's pan-Arab nationalism and republicanism versus the traditional monarchical systems of the Gulf.
And our sources point out that Egyptian military historians refer to this as being analogous to the United States' role in the Vietnam War.
It's a very powerful comparison.
Why the analogy to Vietnam? What made the intervention so difficult for the Egyptian forces?
It came down to logistics and terrain, much like Vietnam. The Egyptian forces were fighting in the high, steep, unfamiliar mountains of Yemen against highly motivated, locally supported royalist tribes.
Logistical lines were impossibly stretched.
Impossibly. Across deserts and up mountain roads, they were suffering heavy casualties from ambushes and disease, and the war became an immense drain on Egypt's economy and political capital. It consumed vast amounts of equipment and diverted essential resources away from defending Egypt itself.
Which had immediate geopolitical consequences elsewhere.
Exactly. That costly commitment severely affected Egypt's military readiness. The war contributed directly to Egypt's catastrophic failure in the 1967 Six-Day War against Israel,
which forced Nasser to recognize the disastrous strategic mistake and withdraw his remaining forces.
He did. The North Yemen Civil War ended when Saudi Arabia finally recognized the Yemeni Republic in 1970, concluding the conflict without a definitive victory for either side.
Fast forward 2 decades to a conflict that defined modern security in the Gulf and solidified Western military presence. The Gulf War of 1990-1991.
This conflict began with Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990. The response was a massive multinational coalition that included key Arab states Egypt, Qatar, Syria, and Saudi Arabia opposing Saddam Hussein's Iraq.
But this war also created deep, painful rifts within the Arab world that have never fully healed.
It fractured relations profoundly. Displays of public support for Iraq by both Jordan and Palestine strained relations with the GCC states and Egypt to the breaking point. It led to years of diplomatic and economic isolation for those states.
In the aftermath, the Damascus Declaration was formalized.
Yes, creating an alliance for joint Arab defensive actions between Egypt, Syria, and the GCC states. The intent was to create a formalized, shared security structure to defend against future internal threats, though this alliance struggled to maintain cohesion.
Finally, we come to the most recent ongoing conflict, which connects directly back to that historic north-south disparity and the environmental pressure we discussed.
The 2014 Yemen civil war.
Right.
This current conflict has its immediate roots in the regional instability of the Arab Spring, which reached Yemen in 2011. It led to protests and the eventual transfer of power to Vice President Hadi.
Hadi attempted a national dialogue to stabilize the country.
But the foundational economic and political issues fueled by water scarcity and demographic pressure were just too deep.
And the power of the Houthi movement surged during this instability.
Correct. The Houthi movement, representing the Zaidi Shiite community, launched an offensive motivated by grievances about political exclusion and regional development. They stormed the capital Sana'a in September 2014.
And in response to the Houthi advance toward the south,
which they saw as a direct existential security threat on their longest and most vulnerable border, Saudi Arabia launched a military intervention in March 2015.
And the international community has widely reported on the devastating human cost.
The civil war, coupled with the massive military intervention and subsequent blockade, has created one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of the 21st century, causing widespread famine in Yemen.
And this current crisis is a tragic, modern, and ongoing manifestation of that persistent historical and geographical disparity we discussed. The oil-rich deserta intervening massively in the affairs of the poverty-stricken Felix.
It is.
So if we synthesize what we've discussed, the Arabian Peninsula is defined by several striking, interconnected paradoxes. It is the original or heimat of the Semitic languages, the birthplace of Islam, rich in ancient civilizations.
Like Saba and Dilmun, yet it is utterly dominated by massive, rapid modern development and explosive demographic growth reliant on external labor.
And the overwhelming defining paradox is the resource disparity. This small collection of nations holds the world's largest oil reserves, yet it relies for its very life on the most overstressed aquifer system in the world.
Oil wealth buys today's power, but water poverty dictates tomorrow's future. It's a structural dichotomy that dwarfs all others.
Let's recap the biggest aha moments that we hope stick with you, the listener. First, the incredible Red Sea coral reefs.
Due to their unique genetic hot weather adaptation, they are largely climate-resistant and pristine, making them a globally important ecological asset.
And it contrasts so sharply with the environmental struggles of the Persian Gulf. Second, the geological and human history. Understanding that this massive landmass wasn't always a barrier, proven by that 90,000-year-old Homo sapiens finger bone found in the Nifud Desert.
Demonstrating that Green Arabia was an early critical corridor for the out-of-Africa migration and later serving as an isolated genetic reservoir.
And third, the fundamental historical identity defined by scarcity and abundance. The Roman division into Arabia Petraea, the Roman province, Arabia Deserta, the massive, politically powerful interior, and Arabia Felix, the fortunate, fertile south.
Which now represents the heart of regional instability.
Knowing this context, the tectonic formation, the water crisis, the demographic skew, and the deep history provides you with a crucial lens for every news story coming out of the Gulf.
It helps you distinguish temporary political maneuvering from deep, enduring structural problems, especially those rooted in resources and history.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the history of the Arabian Peninsula from its identity as three distinct regions, Petraea, Deserta, and Felix, all based purely on environmental capability and trade. The political center of the Islamic world moved away from this peninsula early on, leaving it a spiritual core but a political periphery for centuries. Despite the modern consolidation of power and wealth in the central arid deserta via the discovery of oil, how much do the persistent environmental realities and historical regional roles of the Felix, the mountainous, historically fertile, densely populated region of Yemen, still shape the geopolitical instability, demographic pressures, and long-term existential water scarcity challenges facing the entire oil-rich peninsula today?
Is the current conflict in the South just a political clash?
Or is it the inevitable consequence of a geographical and environmental split that has defined this land for thousands of years?
An environmental question that has irrevocably become an existential security question.
That's it for this deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.